Kelce is done. That's the blunt assessment from one anonymous NFL advanced scout as Kelce prepares for his 14th NFL season. And yes, those are some pretty strong words. The scout reportedly went even further, saying, "What you saw last year, that's what he is." So now the question is getting harder to ignore. Is Travis Kelce actually finished as an elite NFL tight end? Or is one anonymous evaluation turning a complicated career conversation into a much bigger headline than it deserves? Because there are two very different stories developing around Kelce right now. On one side, there's a veteran player coming off a disappointing season, entering his mid-30s with plenty of questions about how much longer he can perform at the highest level. On the other, there's Travis Kelce himself. He's back at Kansas City Chiefs training camp, he's preparing for another season, and he's openly talking about wanting to play at a better level than he did last year. And that makes the story a lot more interesting than simply asking whether Travis Kelce is done. Because an anonymous scout can make a prediction, fans can argue about it, social media can turn it into a war within about 5 minutes, but none of those things can actually decide what happens next. The field can. And that's where this story gets interesting, because Travis Kelce isn't entering the 2026 season with nothing left to prove. He's entering it with something very specific to prove, that last season wasn't the final version of him. And if he can do that, the "Kelce is done" headline could look very different by the time this season is over. The reason that comment has spread so quickly is pretty simple. It sounds definitive. Kelce is done. Not declining, not slowing down, not entering the final stage of his career. Done. And that kind of statement is almost guaranteed to get attention when you're talking about a player as accomplished as Travis Kelce. But there's an important detail that can easily get lost when the quote starts circulating online. The scout is anonymous. That means we don't know exactly who the person is, what teams they have worked for, how closely they have evaluated Kelce, or what information they used to reach that conclusion. So the quote is worth discussing, but it isn't the same thing as an official NFL evaluation. And that distinction matters, because there are legitimate reasons to ask questions about Kelce's future. He's entering his 14th NFL season. He's older than the player who became one of the league's most dominant tight ends, and last season did not produce the kind of numbers fans had become accustomed to seeing from him. Those are real football questions, but turning those questions into "Travis Kelce is finished" is a much bigger leap. And then there's the part of the story that social media seems especially interested in, Taylor Swift. Because whenever Travis Kelce has a difficult season, there is inevitably someone online asking whether his relationship or his enormous celebrity life has something to do with it. It's an easy storyline. It's also one we have to be careful with. There is no evidence here proving that getting married caused a decline in Kelce's football ability. Marriage is one part of his personal life. Football performance is another. And those two things shouldn't automatically be connected just because the timing makes for an interesting headline. In fact, that's what makes the upcoming season so important. If Kelce really is declining, the games will eventually show it. If he still has another high-level season in him, the games will show that too. And unlike an anonymous quote, the evidence will be right there for everyone to see. Targets, catches, yards, touchdowns, and perhaps most importantly, the plays that happen when the Chiefs need them most. So the anonymous scout has made a prediction. Now Travis Kelce has the opportunity to answer it. Not with an argument, not with a social media post, and certainly not with a headline, with football. And that's where the other side of this story comes in. Because while one anonymous scout is already writing the ending of Travis Kelce, the Kansas City Chiefs are still preparing for the season with Kelce right there in the middle of the picture. And one person who has seen him up close for years is head coach Andy Reid. Reid isn't treating Travis Kelce like a player who has already reached the end. He's treating him like a veteran preparing for another season. And that difference is important, because there is a huge gap between saying he's not the player he was 5 years ago and saying he's done. The first is a reasonable question about aging and production. The second is a conclusion, and the Chiefs haven't acted as though that conclusion has already been reached. Kelce is still in Kansas City, he's still practicing, he's still part of the team's preparation, and the organization still expects him to contribute to the offense. That doesn't guarantee another record-breaking season, it doesn't erase the concerns about age, and it certainly doesn't mean the anonymous scout must be wrong. But it does tell us something. The people who actually work with Kelce every day aren't behaving as though his career is already over. And then there's Kelce himself. He's not talking like someone who believes his best football is necessarily behind him. He's talked about wanting to play better this season. That's a pretty important detail, because when a veteran player reaches this stage of his career, motivation isn't usually the question. The question is whether the body can still do what the mind wants it to do. Can the legs still move quickly enough? Can he still create separation? Can he still win against defenders? Can he still make the difficult catches that made him one of the most dangerous tight ends in football? Those are questions no press conference can answer. And Andy Reid can't answer them for him either. Neither can an anonymous scout, neither can Taylor Swift, and neither can social media. Only the season can. What the Chiefs can do right now is prepare Kelce for the best season he has left, and that's exactly why training camp matters. The work happening now is much more useful than an argument happening online. Every practice gives coaches more information, every route gives Kelce another opportunity to prove where his game is, and every week of the season will add another piece to the answer. So maybe the anonymous scout is seeing something the Chiefs are worried about, or maybe the scout is simply making a very early prediction. Either way, there's still a long way to go before anyone can honestly say, Kelce is done. But then you look at the numbers, and suddenly the Kelce is done argument gets a little more complicated, because Travis Kelce's 2025 season was definitely not the peak version of Travis Kelce, but it wasn't exactly nothing either. He finished the regular season with 76 catches, 851 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. Now, compare that to 2024. Kelce had 97 catches that year with 823 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns. And in 2023, he finished with 93 catches, 984 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. So yes, there is a noticeable change. The number of receptions dropped from 97 to 76. That's significant. But here's the interesting part. His receiving yards actually went up from 823 yards in 2024 to 851 yards in 2025. So the numbers don't tell a simple story of a player suddenly falling off a cliff. They tell the story of a veteran whose role and production have changed. And that distinction matters. Because when people say Kelce isn't the same anymore, there can be some truth in that. Of course he's not the same player as he was at his absolute peak. Father Time eventually gets every athlete. But there's a big difference between not the same and not good enough anymore. And that's where the 2026 season becomes so important. The question isn't whether Kelce can magically turn the clock back to 2022. That's not realistic. The question is whether he can still be one of the players the Chiefs rely on when the game is on the line. Because 851 yards in a season doesn't happen by accident. Neither do 76 receptions. Neither do 5 touchdowns. Those numbers don't automatically prove that Kelce is still an elite tight end, but they certainly don't prove that he's finished. And there's another detail worth remembering. Kelce has spent years playing alongside Patrick Mahomes in an offense that has changed as the roster around them has changed. So evaluating one season in isolation can miss part of the bigger picture. The Chiefs are not simply asking, can Travis Kelce be the player he was 5 years ago? They're asking a different question. Can they still use what he does best? Can he still find space against defenses? Can he still make difficult catches? Can he still become the trusted target when a defense knows the ball has to move? And perhaps most importantly, can he still make those plays when the pressure is highest? That's the part an NFL stat sheet can't completely answer. And that's also the part the 2026 season is about to test. Because if Kelce produces at a high level again, the done label will start looking premature. But if his production drops again, the questions about his age and future will become much harder to dismiss. The numbers don't give us the final answer. They give us something better, a reason to keep watching. And now, the debate gets much simpler because the 2026 season is going to give us something that no anonymous scout can provide: evidence, real games, real defensive matchups, real opportunities for Travis Kelce to show exactly where his game is right now. So what should we actually be watching? For starters, can Kelce still create separation? That might sound simple, but it matters enormously for a veteran tight end. If defenders can consistently stay attached to him, the Chiefs have fewer ways to create easy opportunities. But if Kelce is still finding open space, especially against good coverage, that's a very different story. Then there's the physical side. Can he still win contested catches? Can he still make the difficult grabs when a defender is right on top of him? Can he still turn a short completion into a bigger play after the catch? Those are the moments that have defined Travis Kelce for years. And then there's the red zone, because yards and receptions are important, but touchdowns tell another part of the story. When the Chiefs get close to the goal line, can Kelce still be one of the players defenses have to worry about most? And perhaps the biggest question of all, what happens on third down? What happens when the Chiefs need one important conversion? What happens when Patrick Mahomes needs a trusted target with the game on the line? Those situations are where veteran experience can become extremely valuable, and they're also where declining athleticism can become much harder to hide. That's why I don't think the best way to judge Travis Kelce in 2026 is to compare every game to the absolute peak of his career. That's an impossible standard. Instead, watch for consistency. Can he remain productive week after week? Can he stay healthy? Can he continue creating matchup problems? Can he contribute when defenses specifically design their game plan around him? And can he still make the kind of plays that change a football game? If the answer to those questions is yes, the Kelce is done narrative could disappear very quickly. But if the answer starts becoming no, if the separation disappears, the production falls, and the big moments become harder to find, then the critics will have a much stronger case. That's the uncomfortable truth for both sides of this debate. Kelce doesn't need to prove that he's still the player he was at 28. He only needs to prove that he can still be an important difference maker for the Kansas City Chiefs at this stage of his career. And he won't have to explain it to an anonymous scout. He won't have to explain it to social media. He won't even have to explain it to the people debating his personal life. He can simply show it. One route, one catch, one third down conversion, one big play at a time. And by the end of the season, we may have a much clearer answer to the question everyone is asking. And that's probably where this debate needs to stay. Because right now, there are a lot of opinions about Travis Kelce. Some people think he's entering the final chapter of his career. One anonymous scout has already gone further, saying Kelce is done. Other people believe the veteran tight end still has plenty left in the tank, and the Chiefs are preparing for the season as though he still has an important role to play. But none of those opinions can settle this. Not yet, because there is another factor that has become impossible to ignore. The noise around Travis Kelce has become much bigger than football. His marriage to Taylor Swift has turned even ordinary moments into national conversations. A training camp photo becomes a headline, a comment becomes a viral clip, an anonymous opinion becomes a debate, and suddenly everyone has an explanation for what Travis Kelce is going to do next. But football doesn't really work that way. A player's next season can't be predicted by a wedding, it can't be predicted by a social media trend, and it certainly can't be predicted by one anonymous quote. What matters is what happens when the ball is snapped. Can Kelce still get open? Can he still make the difficult catch? Can he still convert the important third down? Can he still create problems for a defense when the Chiefs need him most? Those are the questions that matter, and this time, we're going to get the answers in real time. Maybe the anonymous scout will eventually look like a genius. Maybe Travis Kelce will prove that he still has another high-level season left in him. Maybe the truth will land somewhere in between those two extremes. That's what makes this season interesting, because Travis Kelce doesn't need to win an argument on the internet. He doesn't need to convince every critic. He doesn't need to respond to every headline. He just needs to play football. And when the season is over, we'll have something much more valuable than a prediction. We'll have evidence. The catches, the yards, the touchdowns, the big moments, the games that mattered, and ultimately, the answer. So is Travis Kelce really done? Right now, nobody knows. And maybe that's exactly how it should be, because this story isn't going to be decided by Taylor Swift. It's not going to be decided by an anonymous scout, and it's not going to be decided by social media. It's going to be decided where Travis Kelce has always had the chance to answer his critics, on the field. Let the field decide.